Greetings, this is dslyecxi, and today I'm premiering a new series I'm calling Hindsight. In this, the idea is to take a look back at some sort of tactical scenario and discuss what happened, why it happened, and what can be learned from it. Today's focus is a defensive action from a recent adversarial mission. The scenario involves a Russian force pushing through an area and clearing any caches they find. They know possible cache locations, but only some of them contain actual real caches. As the defenders, we're doing a defense in depth to attempt to attrit the attackers before they can damage too many of the caches. I'm part of Alpha Squad, acting as the fireteam leader of the 2nd Fireteam. The platoon has been spread out such that our squad is on the rightmost flank, on the western side of the zone facing south. My fireteam is on the extreme edge of our platoon, protecting our right flank. We're to protect the Foxtrot zone, while the 1st Fireteam covers the Bravo zone that's near them. So after being tasked with this, I did a quick run around the area to see what the terrain was like. The compound we were in was defensible, but the number and placement of buildings didn't allow a full fireteam to make good use of it. Half the team, perhaps, but not all of us. There were only so many windows and firing apertures pointing in the direction of the enemy's advance. The river near us was something that I wanted to see in more detail, to get a feeling for how the enemy might use it to advance on us. The ideal goal would be to position at least one person to observe the river and warn us if the enemy appeared on the banks or crossed over it. So after a bit of scouting, I found a high feature a bit back that gave a fairly good view of the far side of the river, as well as a decent view of the near side. Anyone coming up through the river to attack the Fox site would have to cross into view of this high feature, so I decided that I'd place my automatic rifleman team, my blue team, up on this. I put them in place, let the yellow team know that they'd be holding the Foxtrot compound, and from here it became a waiting game. I moved out a bit east between our two fire teams in order to see anything that might be missed from the other positions. The broader frontage you have, the more likely you're going to see people trying to use different aspects of concealment to approach you. The terrain to our front was slightly rolling with a fair amount of tree and bush coverage. While we'd likely see movement coming at us through it, there was enough terrain and vegetation concealment available to make it hard to put effective fires to any frontal assault. The general gist of our defense was that we'd hit them as hard as we could, and then we'd fall back to better positions without becoming decisively engaged.
Bravo has a squad to their south, moving west along the riverbed. They could be heading for Alpha. So, 2 heads up.
Enemy movement to the south was reported, with contacts seeming to be headed in our general direction. I hadn't spotted them yet, but I was looking. No one had binoculars on our team, so it was a little hard to keep track.
Looks like they moved west out of Alpha, so they might be going to try the riverbank. Sucks to be them.
It was at this point that it became apparent that they might be moving across our frontage, headed for that riverbank. But it wasn't clear if it was really going to happen, or if they were just positioning themselves for an attack straight at our compound.
Yellow, just hold here for now. I'm gonna go to blue.
The compound didn't really need me, so I headed out to the blue team's position in order to get a perspective from the slightly higher elevation. The ample concealment here made me feel comfortable that I wouldn't be spotted from afar. I couldn't quite see why the enemy would move across the river, so I wasn't too concerned about that possibility, but I could see them moving up it. It wasn't clear what their end goal was, whether they were staging for a frontal attack or attempting to work through the river onto our flank, or what they believed was our flank.
See another small element, possibly fireteam strength, heading north from the Alpha position, heading in a westerly direction as well.
DI Fireteam 160 from blue team moving west. Fireteam leaders, you have discretion on when you engage. Got a fireteam element moving from yellow's position at roughly 190 moving west towards the river. We'll mark a map.
I've counted 8 or 9 crossing. Estimate possibly a squad strength may have moved through there.
Yellow team has contact at 180 moving west.
Our squad leader, Cell, asked if we needed A1 support, since it was becoming increasingly evident that at least a squad was moving towards us from or near the river.
dslyecxi, do you want Alpha 1 in support?
After a moment, I decided against this.
Probably not from here. Maybe when we fall back.
The idea here was to hit and run, and I didn't think we needed more people to be involved in this ambush. We had good terrain, and I felt good about it. Anything more would have probably become crowded. So, of course, Murphy's Law, right then one of my fireteam members from the blue team, the flank security element,
Correction.
loses connection.
Southbound, straight south of my position.
Well, so I decided to stay with the remaining guy, Mike Papa Lima, ready to supplement his AR fires with my grenade launcher. The enemy's been quiet for a bit, so it's hard to tell what's going on. It seems like they're consolidating for a push, so perhaps the river's not going to be relevant after all. I shuffle around a bit to try to get a better perspective on things.
Time of that fire team is moving.
In the distance out to the south-southeast, I can see more of the enemy moving in the direction of the river.
There's a fire team moving.
This is about a fire team worth of them. Now, the reason we don't engage at this point is because there's nothing really in our favor. Being able to see something doesn't mean you can effectively shoot it. And if we fire from too far away, they'll have lots of time to assess the situation and maneuver on us. It's better to wait until they're committed to something, hopefully dangerously so.
They probably massed at least a squad and a half south of Alpha.
Yeah, they're all linking up at that ER fire team holding marker.
As the saying goes, if the enemy's making a mistake, don't interrupt them.
Is Bravo still in contact, lead? I'm thinking they've shifted their entire attack to our flank.
Yeah, I'm thinking they're going to come up down the road at us. Okay, they're making the move west from that fire team holding marker.
Red, like you're blue now, go north a little bit, and then cut west and goodbye to Mike.
I call for one of the other fire team members to come join us on Blue's position. But only moments later, I see someone come around the bend in the river. They are using it after all. So I warn Mike, the AR. He can't see him yet, but he will in a moment. So let's step back for a second and let's take a look at it from the perspective of the enemy. As far as they can tell, they've maintained relative concealment from the Foxtrot compound. All they need to do now is move a bit further up the river, turn, and attack the compound from the flank. One of their fire teams, the one we've just spotted, is attempting to do exactly that. The other one's held back on a slight elevation, observing towards the Fox compound and waiting to act as a base of fire. Back to us.
They're definitely from my position.
Four of them round the bend, with several hanging slightly back, heads poking just over the terrain.
I got them now, my clear.
As they run forward, one of them seems to notice my movement and goes prone, telegraphing that knowledge.
Engage.
I call for Mike to engage. They're looking at me, but Mike is almost 50 meters to my right. He works them over with his AR as I begin lobbing grenades at them. They're in that really sweet spot, exactly where you don't want to be when facing a grenadier. Not only can I see them, I'm slightly elevated from them, and adjustments are very easy to make. I can see the fall around, and just walk it from there. As well as that, being positioned behind a bush means that not only can I fire on them, I can do so in such a way that it's almost impossible for them to see me. The trajectory of the GP safely clears the bush before falling back down on it. So it's fire and adjust, and we're cutting them down. Mike has them fixed, and together we're finishing them. Cell reminds us to pull back when we need to, but it doesn't seem necessary yet. We're knocking them down. We can see the effectiveness of our fires. This is going to be a long mission. I decide to save my last grenades and begin engaging some survivors with rifle fire. This is where I made my mistake. I'd forgotten one thing. While I was concealed from the squad to my front, I wasn't protected on the flank. When I pulled back behind those bushes, I stepped into what was essentially a gap to my front left. So another element out there sees me, and when one of their first shots, it looks almost like I step into it and down I go. The shot comes from about 350 meters away, or just under twice as far as the people were actually engaging. When all was said and done, 2 people had contributed towards the death of around 7 enemy, including 2 fire team leaders and the squad leader. And that's not counting any casualties that may have been inflicted by Yellow Team, which was nearby in the compound. This was accomplished with the loss of 1 fire team leader, myself, and possibly 1 other person. It's hard to say. The intensity of this fight and the casualties inflicted allowed our friendly squad to fall back in good order, while it significantly delayed movement of the attrited enemy squad as they recovered from numerous leadership casualties. So there are several things that contributed to the outcome, and we'll briefly go over each of them. The first, of course, is concealment. The enemy didn't expect to run into my fire team because they hadn't seen anything in that area up to that point. The concealment around both my and Mike's position was sufficient to keep us out of view, and the Yellow Team in the compound was sticking to the buildings and making themselves equally hard to see. The effectiveness of our concealment was made clear after the ambush began, as there was relatively little return fire from the element being ambushed, with most of the fire coming from people who hadn't yet moved onto the riverbank. Fire discipline was another major factor. Though we could see the enemy at various points leading up to our Riverside ambush, there was no point prior to that where we could have delivered truly effective fire on them. By holding and waiting, we allowed them to walk into a very precarious situation that dramatically multiplied the effectiveness of our fire. Our choice of terrain made for a nearly perfect kill zone. The Riverside was almost completely barren, with only a few small rocks to offer some scant cover. The approach up to that point meant that once the enemy rounded the bend in the river, they were well within our effective range, both for machine gun and grenade fire. Next, the enemy's scheme of maneuver made it much more difficult for them to react to the situation that they found themselves in. Running along the riverbank cut their chances for maneuver in half, unless they wanted to swim, and the tightness of their formation relative to blue team's position made for a very dense target. When the ambush began, the enemy in the kill zone were immediately taken under effective fire by the two deadliest weapons in the fire team, the automatic rifle and the grenade launcher, which provided a lethal combination of direct and indirect fire. And the concealment meant that the supporting element was unable to suppress or eliminate the source of this fire. The kill zone enemy had to either fight or flee. Advancing was suicidal as there was nothing to really advance towards. The proximity of the enemy's major source of cover, the slope that the rest of the river was masked by behind them, meant that even after retreating behind it, grenades were able to inflict casualties through indirect fire. Now, as to how to prevent this, at the lowest level, fire team movements should adapt to the terrain's cover and concealment. When there's sparse cover, the formation loosens, providing a dispersed target for any enemy observers. When contact is taken unexpectedly, firing at known, likely, or suspected enemy positions promptly can give the enemy a false sense of exposure. Even if you don't actually see them, you may either get lucky or give them the impression that they've been spotted. If I'd heard bullets hitting around or passing near me, I would have shifted my position, which would have given a brief reprieve from the grenade volley. If you find yourself in a bad spot, don't forget that falling back is an option. While there was no significant cover to the front of the kill zone element or their side, they just passed over a rise that would have been a more than workable position to fall back to and fight from. This is a textbook perfect time to use a peel back maneuver. Finally, when you're conducting movement in an area that's the probable subject of a distributed defense in depth, never assume that not seeing someone in a given area means that the area is clear. There were very strong reasons to suspect that the Fox compound would have people near it. It was on the edge of the defended zone, it bordered a major channelizing feature, the river, it had defensible structures, and it offered a retrograde option to the objective north of it. Thinking through this from the enemy's perspective a bit more may have helped give a sense that it would be a contested objective, and that approaching it would require more caution than otherwise. So that's that. Pretty much any fight you get into in an armor scenario is loaded with lessons to take away. You just have to be willing to sit down and critically look at what happened and how you can learn from it in the future. So that's episode 1 of Hindsight. I hope you've enjoyed this look at a slice of a mission and what fed into it. And until next time, take care and know where to go when the round starts snapping past.
What? We're being held back by what, 3 guys?
Yeah.
We can't see them.
That's
Given
all,
the
yeah, that's
terrain,
all
I'm
we
not
need.
surprised 3 guys could hold us back there.